Our Torah portion this week, Shoftim, is an interesting one. It's also rather famous, as it begins by declaring, Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. And this chasing after justice is accomplished according to the remainder of the Parsha by enacting and maintaining a just judicial system and a just governmental system to protect the values of Israelite society. But within this system, there are a lot of different things covered that you might not think about when you think about judicial systems and government systems. For instance, there's a lovely discussion on how you know whether or not a prophet is someone you should follow or if they're a false prophet. There are discussions about the laws of warfare and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And among its litany of laws, the Parsha ends with a rather obscure edict. It says, when the body of a murder victim is discovered and the murder remains unknown, then the elders must come out and measure to determine the nearest village to the murder, and then the elders of that village are required to come forth and find a place where no grass can grow and break the neck of a heifer. And then they declare publicly, Yadenu lo shafchu et hadam hazeh ve'einenu lo ra'u. Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. Once that ritual is complete, the community is absolved of the innocent blood that has been spread within its sphere of influence. Now, at first glance, this ritual doesn't really seem to further the cause of justice in any particular way. In fact, one might correctly think that the ceremony is more concerned with absolving guilt than with upholding the sanctity of law. But there's a rather critical and, dare I say, timely message underlying this arcane ritual. When there's no suspect to accuse of a murder, the Torah demands that the community assume responsibility for the crime until they can find the guilty party, or if they cannot, until they purge the guilt from their midst. So while it's gruesome, the ritual of the heifer forces people to acknowledge viscerally that a life has been taken, God bless you, and that a horror has been perpetrated by one human being against another, which ruptures the sacred bond of civic community. By making the community responsible to absolve itself of guilt, the ritual of the broken-necked heifer reminds us that ultimately human beings are responsible for one another's welfare, and the sanctity and dignity of individual human lives is the responsibility of the community. Thus, when the sanctity of an individual human life is compromised and no perpetrator can be found, then the people are guilty, and they must make recompense for the life that they failed to protect and dignify. The Portuguese scholar Abravanel teaches that this cow whose neck is broken is actually representative of the entire community of Israel, in order to suggest that any society that fails to uphold the dignity of individual human lives is itself broken and needs to be repaired from the top down. Einenu lo ra'u is what the verse says. Our eyes did not see. Ironically, the verse which recognizes our inability to observe and punish every crime that's committed within our midst also demands us to open our eyes to those crimes that exist within our society undocumented, and to accept our responsibility for their existence. In essence, to become answerable for that which Einenu lo ra'u, our eyes did not see. In the world in which we live in, a vastly interconnected world in which we can read about things that happen on the other side of the globe within an instant, there are quite a few crimes that happen that leave no clear suspects behind. And yet somehow we have to find a way to return to our lives from all of these punishing, saddening, gruesome crimes that happen. However, in that process, we're not allowed to return to our lives in such a way that we pretend we didn't see anything. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a lot easier to hide our head in the sand. But Jewish tradition says no. So dangerous is the impulse to ignore what we see and avert our gaze that the Torah ritualizes our lives and our communities against this particular impulse. If we think of many things, we can say, did our eyes see or did our eyes not see? Did we avert our gaze or did we continue our gaze? Now, to be fair, it can often seem like there's too much to see. Our senses get overloaded with the news, things that happen throughout the world, things that happen in our country, things that happen in our city, things that happen in our community. But according to this ritual, we must publicly acknowledge when a life is violated so that we can reaffirm our commitment to justice and in turn seek to prevent further transgression. Each year on Yom Kippur, we recite a prayer known as Al-Chet, an apology for the sins we have committed. Now, if you look at that list, there's some pretty bad stuff in there. And I gander to say that perhaps nobody here has probably committed half of the things that get mentioned in that prayer. And yet, as a community, we still acknowledge these sins, we still take responsibility for them, and we still atone for them because we exist not as individual human beings, we exist in a community that's responsible for individual human beings. And when our community commits those crimes, they commit them in our name. For Jews, this is the blessing and the curse of living in community. Regardless of our individual efforts, regardless of our individual desires, we cannot escape the fact that we are connected to one another and that our humanity and our accountability are tied up in one another. Or as Rabbi Abraham Heschel once said, when you find the crime, you find that few are guilty, but all are responsible. As we prepare for the new year, we're called upon to examine ourselves. We're called upon to think about those things that we have done in our lives. We're also called upon to think about those things that we've done in our communities, in our cities, in our countries, and in our world. What evils have sprouted within our midst? What crimes have gone unnoticed? Which victims still wait for acknowledgement and affirmation? Only by recognizing these transgressions and accepting responsibility for them can we truly pursue justice according to our Torah. Only by recognizing these transgressions and accepting responsibility for them can we truly pursue repentance according to our Torah. And so, as we commit ourselves to returning to teshuvah, to repentance in this new year, may we seek an atonement not only for ourselves, but for the communities that we exist in. An expiation for all the wrongs that have been wrought in our midst and in our name. Shabbat Shalom.